Have you ever been invisible? Not physically, of course. Not in the way ghosts are invisible, passing through walls, haunting corridors unseen. No, this was something far worse. This was the kind of invisibility that happens in plain sight. The kind where you stand in a crowded room, breathing the same air as everyone else, and yet somehow you simply don't exist. Genevieve Ashford knew that feeling better than anyone. The ballroom at Harrington House blazed with light. 1,000 candles flickered in crystal chandeliers, casting golden fragments across silk gowns and perfectly tailored coats. Music swelled from the orchestra, a waltz that seemed to pulse with its own heartbeat. Laughter rang out bright and effortless. Conversation flowed like champagne, sparkling and intoxicating. It was the first grand reception of the London season, the kind of event where reputations were made, alliances sealed, and futures decided. Genevieve sat in the third chair along the wall in the farthest corner of the ballroom. It wasn't an accident. She had learned over 10 long years exactly where she belonged. The wall chairs were the territory of the forgotten. Widows past their prime, maiden aunts serving as chaperones, and women like her. Women who had aged out of desirability. Women who no longer warranted a second glance from the gentlemen prowling the room like well-dressed wolves. She wore a dress of pale gray silk, modest, expensive enough not to embarrass her family, but not eye-catching. Her dark auburn hair was arranged simply without the fashionable curls that framed the faces of younger women. No feathers, no jewels beyond her mother's modest pearl earrings. She had learned that drawing attention only invited pity, and pity was worse than being ignored. In her lap, she held a book. Not to read, the lighting was too dim and the noise too distracting, but as armor. A book said, "I am content. I do not need your dances or your conversation." It was a lie, but a useful one. Across the room, her younger sister Rosalind twirled in the arms of Viscount Bellamy. Rosalind's rose-pink gown swirled like petals in the wind, her laughter bright as bells. She was 19, beautiful, utterly unaware of the bitter gift that was youth and marriageability. Genevieve watched without resentment. She loved her sister truly. But watching Rosalind live the life Genevieve had once hoped for was like pressing on a bruise that never quite healed. But this ballroom held something different tonight. Vampires. They moved through the crowd with an otherworldly grace that no human could replicate. Their skin was too perfect, like porcelain that had never known sun. Their eyes held depths that spoke of decades, centuries, lifetimes lived, while the world changed around them. Vampires had been part of English high society for over 100 years now. They paid taxes, they held titles, they attended balls, but they rarely danced with humans, and humans rarely approached them. There was an invisible boundary in the ballroom, subtle but absolute. Vampires on one side, humans on the other. Polite nods exchanged, careful distance maintained. Genevieve had never spoken to a vampire. She wasn't sure she wanted to. They were beautiful, yes, terrifying in their perfection. But there was something cold about them, something remote, as if they existed on a plane just slightly removed from the rest of the world. "Genevieve, darling." The voice belonged to her mother, Lady Ashford, who materialized beside her visitor with the sudden efficiency of a general inspecting troops. Her mother's smile was tight, her eyes sweeping Genevieve's appearance with barely concealed disappointment. "Gray again," her mother said, as if the dress had personally offended her. "You could at least wear something with color. How is any gentleman supposed to notice you when you insist on dressing like a governess?" Genevieve's fingers tightened on the book in her lap. "I believe that is precisely the point, Mama. There are no gentlemen interested in noticing me. Not anymore." Her mother's expression flickered, a brief flash of something that might have been sadness or perhaps just frustration. "Don't be dramatic. You are still an Ashford. You still have value." Value. The word sat heavy in Genevieve's chest like a stone. She had value in the same way a chair or a vase had value. Functional, decorative if positioned correctly, but ultimately replaceable. "I'm quite content here, Mama," Genevieve said quietly. "Rosalind is having a wonderful time. That's what matters." Her mother opened her mouth to reply, but before she could, a commotion near the entrance drew every eye in the room. Conversations faltered. The musicians continued playing, but even they seemed to lose a measure of confidence. The air itself seemed to tighten with anticipation and nerves. The Duke of Nighthollow had arrived. Genevieve didn't need to see him to know. She could feel the shift in the room's energy, the way tension coiled like a spring being wound too tight. Dorian Ravenscroft, Duke of Nighthollow, was not a man who entered rooms quietly. Not because he sought attention, quite the opposite, but because his presence demanded it. He was power, old money, a title that traced back 3 centuries. He was also, if the whispers were to be believed, one of the oldest vampires in England. Genevieve's mother straightened her expression, brightening with the particular brightness of ambition. "The Duke," she breathed. "He almost never attends these events. What a coup for Lady Harrington." Genevieve resisted the urge to roll her eyes. Her mother had harbored hopes once that Genevieve might catch the attention of someone important. Those hopes had died quietly over the years, like flowers denied water. Against her better judgment, Genevieve glanced toward the entrance, and for one singular, breathless moment, she saw him. He was tall, taller than most men in the room, with dark hair that looked as though he'd run his hand through it impatiently. His coat was black, perfectly tailored, his cravat tied with the kind of precision that suggested either a very skilled valet or a man who controlled every detail of his existence. His face was all sharp lines, strong jaw, high cheekbones, a mouth that looked like it had forgotten how to smile. But it was his eyes that stopped her. Dark, unreadable, and so utterly devoid of warmth that Genevieve felt a chill despite the heat of the crowded ballroom. He looked like a man who had seen too much and felt too little, a man who had walked through centuries and come out the other side hollow. And then his gaze swept the room, briefly, dismissively. For one impossible second, it landed on her. Genevieve's breath caught, not because he looked at her with interest. He didn't. His eyes passed over her the way one might glance at a piece of furniture. Acknowledged, assessed, immediately forgotten. It lasted less than a heartbeat. But in that heartbeat, Genevieve felt the full weight of her invisibility, sharp and undeniable. He looked away and she exhaled, shaken by something she couldn't name. "Ridiculous man," her mother muttered, "so proud, as if his title makes him a god." Genevieve didn't respond. She wasn't thinking about his pride. She was thinking about his eyes, and the hollow ache they carried. She was thinking that perhaps the Duke of Night Hollow wasn't cold at all. Perhaps he was just as alone as she was, in a different way. The evening dragged on. Genevieve declined 2 dances, one from a kindly older gentleman who pitied her, and one from a young man who clearly mistook her for someone else. She smiled politely, claimed fatigue, and returned to her chair. By the time the clock struck 11, her head ached from the noise and her heart ached from the sameness of it all. She slipped out of the ballroom, seeking refuge in the quieter corridors of Harrington House. The walls here were lined with portraits of stern-faced ancestors, their painted eyes following her as she walked. She found a small alcove near a window overlooking the gardens and sank onto the cushioned seat, pressing her forehead against the cool glass. Outside, the night was dark and still. The moon hung low, a pale sliver barely visible through the clouds. Genevieve closed her eyes and allowed herself for just a moment to imagine a different life, one where she wasn't invisible, one where someone saw her. "Are you unwell?" The voice was low, startling in its closeness. Genevieve jerked upright, her heart slamming against her ribs. She turned and froze. The Duke of Night Hollow stood 3 paces away, his dark eyes fixed on her with an intensity that made her forget how to breathe. He didn't look annoyed at finding her here. He didn't look anything. His expression was unreadable, a mask of perfect control, but there was something in the way he stood. Too still, too tense. That suggested he was just as surprised to find her as she was to see him. "Your Grace," Genevieve stammered, rising quickly and dropping into a curtsy that felt clumsy and rushed. "Forgive me, I didn't mean to intrude." "You're not intruding." His voice was rough like gravel underfoot. "I came here to escape the ballroom. It seems you had the same idea." Genevieve didn't know what to say. The Duke of Night Hollow was speaking to her, actually speaking to her, not out of pity or obligation, but because, why, she couldn't fathom it. He took a step closer, and the moonlight through the window illuminated his face. Up close, he was even more striking, and more devastating. There were shadows beneath his eyes, faint lines at the corners that spoke of sleepless nights. He looked like a man carrying a burden too heavy to set down, a man who had carried it for a very, very long time. "I know you," he said suddenly. Genevieve blinked. I don't think so, Your Grace." "You're Genevieve Ashford." Her heart stuttered. He knew her name. "How, why, I am," she said carefully, "though I confess I'm surprised you know that." Something flickered in his eyes. Too quick to name. "Your aunt," he said. "Lady Octavia Ashford. She and I were acquainted." The mention of Aunt Octavia sent a strange shiver through Genevieve. Her aunt had passed away 6 years ago. Suddenly and without warning, Genevieve had been fond of her. Aunt Octavia had been the only member of the family who never treated Genevieve's unmarried state as a tragedy. She had been eccentric, sharp-witted, fiercely independent. She had also apparently known the Duke of Night Hollow. "I didn't know she was acquainted with you." Genevieve said softly. She was a remarkable woman. His jaw tightened. I'm sorry for your loss. And I for yours, Genevieve replied, because it was clear somehow that he had lost someone too. Not recently, perhaps, but loss lingered in him like smoke. Silence stretched between them. Not uncomfortable, but heavy with unspoken things. Genevieve felt the wild urge to say something, anything to keep him from walking away. But before she could, he spoke. You'll be receiving a letter tomorrow. His voice was quiet but firm. From my solicitor, your aunt left instructions regarding you. Genevieve's stomach twisted. Instructions. His eyes met hers, and for the first time she saw something other than ice in them. She saw regret. You should prepare yourself, Miss Ashford, he said quietly. Everything is about to change. And then without another word, he turned and walked away, his footsteps echoing down the empty corridor. Genevieve stood frozen, her heart racing, her mind spinning with questions she had no answers for. What had Aunt Octavia done? And why did the Duke of Night Hollow look at her like she was both a problem he had to solve and a mystery he wasn't sure he wanted to unravel? Genevieve didn't sleep that night. She lay in her bed staring at the canopy above her, watching shadows dance across the cream-colored fabric as the candle on her nightstand flickered. Her mind replayed the Duke's words over and over like a melody she couldn't forget. You should prepare yourself. Everything is about to change. What had Aunt Octavia done? Her aunt had been unconventional, yes. She'd never married, had traveled extensively, had filled her London townhouse with books and curiosities from every corner of the world. She'd been the subject of whispers and raised eyebrows, but she'd never cared. Genevieve had loved her for that, for her refusal to apologize for being exactly who she was. But instructions regarding Genevieve. And why would the Duke of Night Hollow, of all people, be involved? When dawn finally broke pale and gray through her window, Genevieve felt as though she'd been awake for days. The letter arrived at precisely 9 o'clock. Genevieve was in the morning room pretending to eat breakfast while her mother read correspondence and her father hid behind the Times. Rosalind was still asleep. She danced until 3 in the morning and wouldn't surface until noon. The butler entered carrying a silver tray with a single envelope, heavy cream paper, a wax seal stamped with an elaborate crest Genevieve didn't recognize. For Miss Genevieve, the butler announced, his tone carefully neutral. Her mother looked up sharply. For Genevieve, Genevieve's hands trembled as she took the envelope. The paper was expensive, the kind used by solicitors and men of significant means. Her name was written in precise, elegant script across the front. Miss Genevieve Ashford. She broke the seal. The room fell silent. Even her father lowered his newspaper, watching her with an expression caught between curiosity and concern. Genevieve unfolded the letter and began to read. Dear Miss Ashford, I am writing on behalf of the late Lady Octavia Ashford, whose last will and testament I had the honor of drafting. You are hereby requested to attend a formal reading of said will at the offices of Thornwood and Associates, Lincoln's Inn, at 2 o'clock this afternoon. Your attendance is required as you are named as a primary beneficiary. His Grace the Duke of Night Hollow will also be in attendance as executor of Lady Octavia's estate. Please confirm your attendance at your earliest convenience. Your obedient servant, Mr. Edmund Fairfax, Solicitor. Genevieve read it twice, then a third time, because surely she'd misunderstood. Primary beneficiary. Aunt Octavia had left her something significant enough to require a formal reading. And the Duke was the executor. Well, her mother demanded, what is it? Genevieve looked up, her voice steady despite the earthquake happening inside her chest. Aunt Octavia left me something in her will. I'm to attend a reading this afternoon. Her father set down his newspaper. What did she leave you? I don't know yet. Her mother's eyes narrowed. Why would Octavia leave you anything? She had no children, but surely her estate would go to your father or be divided among... The letter says I'm a primary beneficiary. Genevieve interrupted quietly. I'll know more this afternoon. Her mother opened her mouth, closed it, then opened it again. The Duke of Night Hollow is involved. He's the executor. Something shifted in her mother's expression. Calculation, hope, ambition, all flickering across her face like candlelight. How extraordinary, she murmured. You must wear the blue dress, and for heaven's sake do something with your hair. Genevieve didn't respond. She was still staring at the letter, at the words that refused to make sense. Everything is about to change. He'd known. Last night in that corridor, the Duke had known exactly what this letter would say, and he'd looked at her with something that might have been pity. Lincoln's Inn was a warren of old stone buildings, narrow lanes, and brass plaques announcing the names of solicitors who'd practiced law for generations. Genevieve's carriage stopped in front of a building with tall, narrow windows and a door painted glossy black. The plaque beside it read, Thornwood and Associates. Her maid Mary accompanied her inside. The interior was all dark wood paneling, leather-bound books, and the smell of ink and old paper. A clerk ushered them into a private office on the second floor. The Duke was already there. He stood by the window, his back to the door, hands clasped behind him. He didn't turn when she entered, but she saw his shoulders tighten. A subtle shift, barely perceptible, but there. Miss Ashford, the solicitor, Mr. Fairfax, greeted her warmly. He was a man in his 60s with kind eyes and ink-stained fingers. Please sit. We're waiting for one more party and then we can begin. Genevieve sat in one of the leather chairs facing the massive desk. Mary stood discreetly near the door. The Duke remained at the window, a dark silhouette against the gray London light. The silence was suffocating. Your Grace, Genevieve said quietly because she couldn't bear it any longer. Did she tell you what she intended? He turned then, slowly, and the expression on his face stole the breath from her lungs. He looked haunted. She told me enough, he said, his voice low and rough. Enough to know that she was either the wisest woman I ever met or the cruelest. Before Genevieve could respond, the door opened. A young woman entered, a cousin Genevieve barely knew, and two distant relatives who looked equally confused. They took their seats, murmuring polite greetings. Mr. Fairfax cleared his throat. Now that we are all assembled, let us proceed. He opened a leather folio and withdrew a document written in Aunt Octavia's unmistakable handwriting. Bold, slanted, utterly confident. I, Lady Octavia Ashford. Mr. Fairfax read aloud, being of sound mind and body, do hereby declare this to be my last will and testament. Genevieve's heart hammered. To my dear niece, Miss Genevieve Ashford, I leave the entirety of my estate, including Thornfield Manor, my townhouse in London, and all assets, properties, and investments held in my name at the time of my death. Silence. Absolute ringing silence. Genevieve couldn't breathe, couldn't think. The entirety of the estate. Aunt Octavia had been wealthy, very wealthy. This wasn't a small bequest, this was a fortune. Her mother would faint. However, Mr. Fairfax continued, and Genevieve's stomach dropped. Of course there was a however. This inheritance is conditional. Genevieve's vision blurred. Miss Genevieve must marry within 6 months of the reading of this will. Should she fail to do so, the estate will be dissolved, the assets sold, and the proceeds donated to various charities as outlined in Appendix C. The words hit her like a physical blow. Married within 6 months. Furthermore, Mr. Fairfax said, and his voice gentled, as if he knew how devastating his next words would be, Lady Octavia has named His Grace the Duke of Nighthollow as executor and guardian of this condition. Genevieve's gaze snapped to the Duke. He was staring at her, his jaw tight, his eyes dark and unreadable. He is tasked with ensuring that Miss Genevieve's suitor is a man of honor, good character, and genuine affection. Should His Grace determine that a proposed match is motivated solely by financial gain, he holds the authority to reject it. The room spun. The Duke. The Duke had the power to approve or reject anyone who courted her. Why? The word tore out of Genevieve before she could stop it. Why would she do this? Mr. Fairfax hesitated, then withdrew another sheet of paper. Your aunt left you a letter, Miss Ashford. Perhaps it will provide some clarity. He handed it to her. Genevieve's hands shook as she unfolded the paper. Aunt Octavia's handwriting swam before her eyes, but she forced herself to focus. My dearest Genevieve, if you are reading this, then I have departed this world, and you are likely furious with me. Good. Anger means you're alive, and that's precisely what I need you to be. You have spent 28 years making yourself small, invisible, acceptable. You've convinced yourself that being overlooked is the same as being safe. It isn't, darling girl. It's slow death. I am giving you a fortune because you deserve it, but I am giving it with a condition because I know you. Left to your own devices, you would let this money sit untouched, would continue to live in the shadows, would never demand more from this world than it's willing to give you. Marry Genevieve, but not just anyone. Marry someone who sees you, who values you, who makes you feel alive. I have entrusted Dorian Ravenscroft with this task because he understands what it means to feel alone, even in a crowded room. He will not let you settle. He will not let you accept less than you deserve. You have 6 months, my darling. 6 months to seize the life you were always meant to live. Do not waste them being afraid. With all my love, Octavia. Tears blurred Genevieve's vision. She folded the letter carefully, her hands trembling. Aunt Octavia had known. She'd known exactly how Genevieve had lived. Quietly, carefully, invisibly. And she'd tried in her own maddening way to save her. But married in 6 months. Genevieve was unmarriageable. Everyone knew it. That's why she was still sitting on wall chairs at ballrooms. She looked up at the Duke and found him watching her with an expression she couldn't decipher. "You agreed to this," she asked, her voice shaking. "Your aunt didn't give me much choice," he said quietly. "She made me promise before she died. And if I refuse, if I don't marry, then you lose everything, and your aunt's wishes are disregarded." Genevieve closed her eyes. 6 months, a fortune, and the Duke of Night Hollow standing between her and every fortune hunter in London. "This is impossible," she whispered. "Yes," the Duke agreed, his voice low and edged with something that might have been sympathy. "It is." But when Genevieve opened her eyes and met his gaze, she saw something else flicker there, something dangerous and complicated. "Then we'd better get started," he said. The carriage ride back to Ashford House felt surreal. Genevieve sat across from Mary, but she couldn't focus on anything beyond the window. London passed by in a blur of gray stone and hurrying pedestrians. All she could see was Aunt Octavia's letter. The words burned into her memory. "You have spent 28 years making yourself small." The truth of it ached like a physical wound. Mary cleared her throat gently. "Miss, are you quite all right?" Genevieve blinked, pulling herself back to the present. "I honestly don't know, Mary. If I may say so, miss, it's quite a lot to inherit." "It's not the inheritance," Genevieve said quietly. "It's the condition." Mary's expression softened. She'd been with Genevieve for 7 years, long enough to understand exactly what unmarriageable meant in their world, long enough to have witnessed every ball where Genevieve sat along the wall, every season that passed without a single serious suitor. "Your aunt must have believed you could do it," Mary offered, "or she was simply mad." But even as she said it, Genevieve knew it wasn't true. Aunt Octavia had been many things: eccentric, unconventional, infuriatingly meddlesome, but never mad. Everything she'd done had been deliberate, including making the Duke of Night Hollow her executor. The house was in chaos when Genevieve arrived. Her mother met her in the entrance hall before she'd even removed her cloak, eyes bright with barely contained excitement. Her father stood behind her, looking simultaneously pleased and bewildered. "Well," her mother demanded, "what did she leave you?" Genevieve took a breath. There was no point in delaying. Everything. Thornfield Manor, the London townhouse, all her investments and assets. Her mother's hand flew to her chest. "Everything, Genevieve, that's a fortune." "There's a condition." The excitement dimmed slightly. "What kind of condition?" "I must marry within 6 months, or I forfeit the entire inheritance." Silence. Then her mother laughed, a high, slightly hysterical sound. "Mary, well, that's not a problem at all. With that kind of dowry, you'll have suitors lining up before week's end." Genevieve felt something cold settle in her stomach. Of course her mother was right. The moment word spread that Genevieve Ashford had inherited a fortune, every fortune hunter, every second son in need of funds, every desperate gentleman would come calling. But Aunt Octavia had anticipated that too. "The Duke of Night Hollow has been named executor," Genevieve continued. "He has the authority to approve or reject any suitor he deems unworthy." Her father's eyebrows rose. "Night Hollow? That's highly unusual." "It's brilliant," her mother exclaimed. "His endorsement would be invaluable. Genevieve, this is your chance. You must make a good impression on him. You must—" "I don't think the Duke is particularly interested in my impressions," Genevieve said quietly. "He's fulfilling a promise to Aunt Octavia. Nothing more." But even as she said it, she remembered the way he'd looked at her, like she was a puzzle he couldn't quite solve, like he wasn't sure whether he wanted to solve it or walk away. 3 days passed, 3 days during which Genevieve's life transformed in ways both wonderful and terrible. The wonderful, she visited Thornfield Manor, Aunt Octavia's country estate in Surrey. It was beautiful, all honey-colored stone and sprawling gardens filled with light and books and the echo of her aunt's vibrant spirit. Walking through those rooms, Genevieve felt closer to Octavia than she had since the funeral. She also visited the London townhouse, smaller but equally charming, and met with the estate manager who outlined her new financial position. She was by any measure independently wealthy. The terrible word had spread. By the second day, the first flowers arrived. By the third, the drawing room was crowded with visitors. Gentlemen who had never given her a second glance suddenly discovered they'd always found her utterly charming. Her mother was in heaven, orchestrating tea times, encouraging conversations. Genevieve felt like a piece of meat being circled by hungry dogs. None of them saw her. They saw the inheritance. On the fourth morning, Genevieve woke with a pounding headache and a desperate need to escape. She dressed quickly, told Mary she was going for a walk, and slipped out before her mother could organize another parade of suitors. She walked without direction, letting her feet carry her through Mayfair's elegant streets. The morning was cool, the sky heavy with clouds threatening rain. She pulled her cloak tighter and kept walking. She didn't realize where she was going until she found herself standing outside a tall, imposing townhouse with black iron railings and windows that reflected the gray sky like dark mirrors. Night Hollow House. Genevieve's breath caught. She hadn't meant to come here. Or perhaps she had and simply hadn't admitted it to herself. Before she could turn away, the front door opened. The Duke himself stood in the doorway, dressed in riding clothes, dark breeches, tall boots, a coat that emphasized the breadth of his shoulders. He looked startled to see her. Then something else flickered across his face, something that might have been relief. "Miss Ashford," his voice was low, rough. "Are they driving you mad yet?" Despite everything, Genevieve laughed. It burst out of her, unexpected and genuine. "Is it that obvious? I've been receiving letters." He descended the steps, moving closer. "From gentlemen requesting my endorsement. 17 so far. None of whom, I might add, had ever expressed interest in you before your inheritance." Genevieve's amusement faded. "I see. I rejected all of them." Her eyes snapped to his. "All of them. Your aunt tasked me with protecting you from fortune hunters, Miss Ashford. That is precisely what I intend to do. And how am I supposed to find a husband in 6 months if you reject everyone? You'll find someone worthy." "Worthy," Genevieve laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Your Grace, I've been on the marriage market for 10 years. If there was someone worthy interested in me, they would have appeared by now." He took another step closer. They were standing on the pavement now, morning foot traffic passing around them. But Genevieve couldn't look away from his face. Up close, she could see the tension in his jaw. The way his hands flexed at his sides as if he wanted to reach for something and wouldn't allow himself. "Perhaps they were looking at the wrong woman," he said quietly. Genevieve froze. The words hung between them, weighted with meaning she didn't dare examine. The Duke took one more step, close enough now that she could see the faint silver flecks in his dark eyes, could feel the unnatural coolness that radiated from him despite the autumn chill. Vampire. The word whispered through her mind. He was vampire. And she was standing on a public street, close enough to touch, him heart racing for reasons that had nothing to do with fear. "I have a proposition," he said, his voice dropping lower. Genevieve's heart stuttered. "A proposition?" "Your aunt was right about both of us." His eyes were dark, unreadable, but there was something raw in them now, something that looked almost like desperation. "We're both invisible, in different ways, both trapped by expectations, by duties, by identities that define us more than we define them. I don't understand." He took a breath, and when he spoke again, his voice was so low she had to lean forward to hear him. "Marry me." The world tilted. Genevieve stared at him, certain she'd misheard. What? "Marry me," he repeated, and now there was something fierce in his expression. "Not for love, not for romance, but as a solution to both our problems." "Problems?" Genevieve could barely form words. "Your Grace, you're a duke. You're vampire nobility. You could marry anyone." "No," the word was sharp. "I can't." His jaw tightened. "I'm expected to marry someone appropriate, someone titled, connected, politically advantageous, someone who will smile and perform and never ask questions." He paused. "Your aunt understood that. She knew I was as much a prisoner of my position as you were of yours." Genevieve's mind reeled. "So you're proposing what? A marriage of convenience, a marriage of mutual benefit," he corrected. "You fulfill your aunt's condition and secure your inheritance. I fulfill society's expectations and gain the freedom to live my life without constant pressure." It was practical, logical, utterly devoid of sentiment, and it made Genevieve's chest ache with a loneliness so profound she almost couldn't breathe. "You don't even know me," she whispered. "No," he agreed, "but I knew your aunt, and she trusted me with this, with you." He paused, and something shifted in his expression, something vulnerable beneath the ice. "And perhaps knowing each other isn't the worst place to start." Genevieve looked at him, really looked at him, at the man beneath the title, the shadows beneath his eyes. the tension in his shoulders, the way he held himself like someone bracing for a blow. Why? She asked. Why would you truly do this? For a long moment he didn't answer. Then so quietly she almost didn't hear it. Because your aunt asked me to protect you and because he stopped, his throat working. Because I'm tired of being alone. The honesty of it hit Genevieve like a physical force. She should refuse. It was insane. They were strangers. Marriage should be more than a business arrangement, more than mutual loneliness seeking company. But as she stood there looking into the eyes of the most powerful man in London, a man who looked as lost as she felt, Genevieve realized something. Perhaps Aunt Octavia hadn't been cruel at all. Perhaps she'd been giving them both exactly what they needed, a chance to be seen. I need time, Genevieve said finally, to think. The Duke nodded, something like disappointment flickering across his face before he shuddered it. Of course. But your grace, Dorian Marlborough, he interrupted softly. If we are to consider this, you should call me Dorian. The name felt strange on her tongue, intimate. Dorian, she said, testing it. His eyes darkened at the sound. I need you to answer one question first. Name it. Genevieve took a breath. That night at the ball, when you found me in the corridor, you said my aunt sent you to find me. What did you mean? For a moment she thought he wouldn't answer. Then he said very quietly, your aunt wrote to me the week before she died. She told me you would be at that ball. Told me where to find you. He paused. She said, find my Ginny. She'll be hiding. She always hides. But Dorian, you'll see her. I know you will. Because you understand what it means to feel alone while everyone is watching. Genevieve's eyes filled with tears. Octavia had orchestrated even that. The meeting in the corridor, the warning, everything. She knew, Genevieve whispered. She knew exactly what she was doing. Yes, Dorian agreed. She did. He stepped back, putting careful distance between them. Think, Miss Ashford. Take whatever time you need, but... He glanced up at the gathering clouds. Think quickly. Your fortune hunters aren't going to wait, and neither will the clock. Then he turned and walked back into his house, leaving Genevieve standing on the pavement. Her heart racing, her entire world turned upside down. The Duke of Nighthollow had just proposed to her. A vampire. An immortal. A man who had walked this earth for nearly 3 centuries. And heaven help her. She was actually considering it. Genevieve didn't return home immediately. She walked through Mayfair's pristine streets past Hyde Park, where riders trotted along Rotten Row, their horses' hooves a rhythmic percussion against packed earth. She barely saw any of it. Her mind was a storm of questions, doubts, and one impossible truth. The Duke of Nighthollow had proposed marriage. Not out of love, not even out of desire, but out of understanding. By the time Genevieve finally returned to Ashford House, the afternoon had faded into early evening. Her mother was waiting in the drawing room, practically vibrating with excitement. There you are, Genevieve. Where have you been? Lord Pemington called 3 times, and Mr. Hartley sent another arrangement of flowers. And oh, Viscount Ashworth's mother hinted rather strongly that her son would be calling tomorrow. Isn't it marvelous? Genevieve removed her cloak, slowly buying herself a moment. Marvelous, she echoed, the word hollow. Her mother's smile faltered. You don't seem pleased. I'm overwhelmed, Mama. Well, of course you are. This is everything we've hoped for. You must choose carefully, but we haven't much time. 6 months sounds generous, but courtship takes time, and then there are the banns to be read and... Mama, Genevieve's voice came out sharper than intended. I need to think. Her mother blinked, clearly taken aback. Genevieve never spoke sharply. Genevieve never pushed back. Think about what you have, a dozen eligible suitors already and more arriving daily. I need to think about what I want, Genevieve said quietly. Not what's convenient, not what's expected, what I actually want. For a moment, her mother simply stared. Then unexpectedly, her expression softened. You sound like Octavia, she murmured. She used to say things like that, before she drove the entire family mad with her unconventional choices. Genevieve felt a lump form in her throat. Perhaps she was right too. Her mother opened her mouth, closed it, then sighed. Perhaps, but darling, wanting and having are 2 different things. The world doesn't often give us what we want. Then maybe it's time I asked for it anyway. That night, Genevieve couldn't sleep. She sat at her writing desk, a blank piece of paper before her, trying to organize her thoughts. She'd always found clarity in writing, in seeing her thoughts transform into tangible words. She picked up her pen. Reasons to accept the Duke's proposal. It fulfills Aunt Octavia's condition. He understands what it means to be trapped. No pretense of love, therefore no risk of heartbreak. He's honorable. Aunt Octavia trusted him. Freedom from fortune hunters. I won't be invisible to him. That last one shouldn't matter. It was foolish, sentimental, dangerous, but it mattered more than all the others combined. Reasons to refuse. We barely know each other. He's vampire. I'm human. The complications are endless. Marriage should be more than mutual convenience. What if I come to want more than he can give? That last question kept her awake long after she'd blown out her candle. The next morning, a note arrived. Genevieve recognized the heavy cream paper, the precise handwriting. Her heart performed an uncomfortable, acrobatic feat as she broke the seal. Miss Ashford, I realized my proposition yesterday was sudden and perhaps unwelcome. I would like the opportunity to speak with you properly without the pressure of pavements and passersby. Would you do me the honor of riding with me in Hyde Park this afternoon at 4 o'clock? We need not discuss the proposal if you're not ready, but I believe we should at least become acquainted. Yours, Dorian Ravenscroft. Genevieve read it 3 times. The formality of it was so perfectly him, controlled, measured, giving nothing away. Mary, Genevieve called, find my riding habit, the dark green one. Hyde Park at 4 o'clock was a parade of London's finest. Ladies in exquisite riding habits perched side saddle on perfectly groomed horses. Gentlemen showed off their horsemanship. Carriages rolled past their occupants, nodding to acquaintances. It was theater, social performance, and Genevieve had always hated it. But today, sitting atop a gentle mare provided by the Duke's stables with Dorian himself mounted on a magnificent black stallion beside her, Genevieve felt something different. She felt visible. Every eye turned their direction. Whispers rippled through the crowd like wind through wheat. The unmarriageable Ashford girl, riding with the Duke of Night Hollow. Speculation would be rampant by evening. You're creating quite a scandal, Genevieve said quietly as they walked their horses along the path. Good, Dorian replied, his voice low, meant only for her. Let them talk. It will discourage your other suitors. You're very confident I'll accept your proposal. No. He glanced at her and she saw something raw in his expression. I'm hopeful. There's a difference. Genevieve's breath caught. Hopeful. Such a simple word. Yet hearing it from him felt like a confession. They rode in silence for a moment, the city sounds muted by the trees surrounding them. Then Dorian spoke again. I should tell you about my first marriage. Genevieve's head snapped toward him. Your first, I didn't know you'd been married. Most people don't. His jaw tightened. Her name was Cordelia. We married when I was still young, by vampire standards at least. I'd only been turned 27 years. He paused and Genevieve waited, her heart aching at the pain in his voice. She was beautiful, brilliant, everything a vampire duchess should be. What happened? Dorian's hands tightened on the reins. I turned her. She begged me to, said she wanted to spend eternity with me. He stopped, his throat working. But eternity is a long time, Miss Ashford, and I discovered that Cordelia didn't want me. She wanted immortality, adventure, power. She left. After 50 years of marriage, she said I was too human still, too attached to mortal concerns. She wanted to embrace what we were, predators, superior beings. His voice cracked just slightly. I wanted to remember what it felt like to be human, to love, to care. Genevieve felt tears prick her eyes. That's not your fault. Isn't it? I turned her. I made her into something she didn't fully understand. And when she realized what immortality truly meant, she left. He turned to look at Genevieve fully, and the devastation in his eyes nearly undid her. I swore I would never do that again. Never trap someone in a marriage they didn't choose. Never pretend affection I didn't feel. Is that why you've never remarried? Partly, also because every woman I've met since sees only the title, the wealth, the power. He held her gaze. Until you. You don't know that, Genevieve whispered. You barely know me. I know you didn't want the inheritance. I know you walked away from a ballroom to find peace. I know you loved your aunt enough to cry reading her letter. He paused. And I know you understand what loneliness feels like. Genevieve couldn't breathe. He was right about all of it. If we married, she said carefully, what would you expect from me? Honesty, he said immediately. I don't want performance. I don't want you to pretend to be someone you're not. Be yourself, read your books, tend your aunt's gardens, live your life freely. And you, what would you want for yourself? The same peace, privacy, freedom from constant expectations. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. And perhaps companionship, if we find we suit each other. And if we don't, Then we'll be civil, respectful. We'll maintain separate lives and bother each other as little as possible. He paused. But I don't think that will happen. Why not? Because your aunt knew us both, and she believed we would fit. Genevieve looked away, her throat tight. You have a great deal of faith in a dead woman's matchmaking. I have faith in her, Dorian corrected. She was the wisest person I ever met. He paused, then added quietly, if she thought this could work, I'd like to try. They'd reached a more secluded part of the park where the trees grew thicker and the path curved away from the main thoroughfare. Dorian brought his horse to a stop, and Genevieve did the same. He dismounted, then moved to help her down. His hands circled her waist, strong and steady. For a moment, they stood close enough that she could see the flecks of silver in his dark eyes, could feel the unnatural coolness of his skin even through her riding habit. Vampire. The word whispered through her mind, but she wasn't afraid. I won't force you, Dorian said quietly. If you refuse, I'll honor your decision. I'll help you find someone else, someone who might offer you more than I can. And what can you offer me? Honesty, respect, protection. He paused, his eyes searching hers, and the promise that you will never be invisible to me. Not for a single day. When Genevieve's heart hammered against her ribs, she should step back, should put distance between them. But she couldn't move to bind him. I need to ask you something, she said. Anything. That night at the ball, in the corridor, you knew about the will. You knew what it would mean for me. Why did you tell me to prepare myself? You could have let it be a surprise. His expression shifted, something vulnerable breaking through. Because I didn't want you to face it alone. I know what it's like to have your life upended by obligations you didn't choose. He stopped, his jaw working. I thought if you had warning, even just a night to prepare, I wanted to protect you. Even then. The admission hung between them, more intimate than any touch. Genevieve took a shaky breath. I need one more day to be certain. Take whatever time you need. But Dorian, she tested his name on her tongue again. His eyes darkened at the sound. If I say yes, I need you to promise me something. Name it. Promise me you won't settle for a marriage that makes you as lonely as your first one. If we do this, we try. We actually try to be partners. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then he lifted his hands slowly, giving her time to pull away. When she didn't, he touched her face. Just his fingertips against her cheek. Feather-light and devastating. Cool skin, gentle pressure, the touch of someone who had learned over centuries exactly how fragile humans could be. I promise, he said, on your aunt's memory. I promise, Morabo. Genevieve closed her eyes, leaning into his touch for just a moment before stepping back. Tomorrow, she said. I'll give you my answer tomorrow. He nodded, and though his expression remained controlled, she saw hope flicker in his eyes like candlelight. Genevieve sat in the library of her aunt's townhouse, her townhouse now, surrounded by books that smelled of leather and old paper and memories. She'd come here alone, needing space away from her mother's eager questions and the endless stream of suitors cluttering their drawing room. The house was quiet, too quiet, but it was the kind of quiet Genevieve had always craved, the kind that let her think. On the desk before her lay 2 letters, one from Lord Pemington, flowery and effusive, declaring his long-held admiration for her that had mysteriously never manifested until she'd inherited a fortune. The other from Mr. Hartley, a second son with debts and a charming smile promising her a love match for the ages. Both were lies wrapped in pretty words. Genevieve pushed them aside and pulled out the one that mattered. Aunt Octavia's letter, worn now from being read and reread. Marry someone who sees you, who values you, who makes you feel alive. Genevieve closed her eyes. An unbidden image rose in her mind. Dorian Ravenscroft standing in the misty morning light outside his townhouse. His dark eyes unguarded, his voice rough with honesty. He saw her. God help her, he saw her in a way no one else ever had. Not as unmarriageable, not as a fortune to be claimed, but as someone equally trapped, equally invisible, equally desperate for something real. Was that enough? Could a marriage built on mutual understanding instead of love actually work? Genevieve thought of his first wife, beautiful, accomplished, desperately unhappy, trapped in a marriage to a man she couldn't love. But Dorian wasn't asking for love. He was asking for honesty, partnership, a chance to try. And perhaps that was more than most marriages started with. Genevieve picked up her pen. The note she sent was simple. Your Grace, my answer is yes, Genevieve. She sealed it before she could second-guess herself. Called for a footman and sent it to Night Hollow House. Then she sat back and waited for her life to change. He arrived within the hour. Genevieve heard the commotion downstairs. Her mother's startled exclamation, her father's gruff greeting, Dorian's low voice requesting a private audience with Genevieve. She stood, smoothed her skirts, and tried to calm the wild beating of her heart. When he entered the library, he looked different somehow, less guarded. The shadows under his eyes seemed lighter, and there was something almost tentative in the way he moved toward her. "Miss Ashford," he said, then stopped. A faint smile touched his lips. "I suppose I should get used to calling you Genevieve. And I should call you Dorian." She tested the name again, and this time it felt less strange, more like something that belonged to her. They stood facing each other, the desk between them like a barrier neither quite knew how to cross. Genevieve's hands trembled slightly, so she clasped them together. "I meant what I said in my note," she told him. "Yes, I'll marry you." Something shifted in his expression, relief so profound it took her breath away. "Thank you," he said, and his voice was rough. "I know this isn't conventional, but I promise you, Genevieve, I will do everything in my power to make this work." "As will I." She took a breath. "But we should discuss practicalities, expectations. I don't want misunderstandings." "Agreed." He moved around the desk, closer but still maintaining a respectful distance. "What do you need to know? Where will we live?" "I have several estates. Night Hollow Hall in Northumberland is the primary seat, but it's cold and rather grim. I thought perhaps we might spend most of our time at Thornfield Manor, your aunt's estate." Genevieve's throat tightened. He'd thought of that, of keeping her connected to Octavia. "That's very considerate. I also have a townhouse here in London, though I confess I spend as little time in the city as possible." A small smile touched Genevieve's lips. "I've never been fond of London either. The country suits me better." "We're well matched already." The words hung between them. Gentle, hopeful. Genevieve took another breath. "What about the vampire aspects, your need for blood?" Dorian's expression grew serious. "I feed from blood banks, a modern system, discreet and humane. I will never ask you for blood, Genevieve. Never. And sunlight. I can walk in shade. Cloudy days. But direct sunlight is painful. Not immediately fatal, but dangerous with prolonged exposure." He paused. "I don't sleep in a coffin, if that's what you're wondering. I sleep in a bed, like anyone else, though I need less sleep than humans." Despite the tension, Genevieve felt a small laugh escape. "I confess that's a relief." Dorian's smile widened slightly. "There are many myths about vampires, Genevieve. I'll be happy to separate fact from fiction." They fell into silence again. Then Genevieve forced herself to ask the question that had been burning in her mind. "An intimacy." The word came out quieter than she'd intended, heat rising in her cheeks. Dorian's eyes darkened. "I won't pressure you. Ever. If and when that aspect of marriage develops between us, it will be because we both want it, not out of duty." He paused, his voice dropping lower. "I'm vampire Genevieve, but I'm still a man. I have the same desires, the same capacity for connection. But I've lived long enough to know that true intimacy requires trust, and trust takes time." Genevieve nodded, her heart racing. The way he looked at her in that moment, like she was something precious and fragile, made her wonder if perhaps desire wasn't as impossible as she'd thought. "I have a condition of my own," Dorian said quietly. "What is it?" "Your fortune remains yours. I'll have my solicitor draw up papers ensuring that your inheritance is protected, untouchable by me or anyone else. You'll have complete financial independence." Genevieve stared at him. "That's highly unusual." "I don't want your money, Genevieve. I never did. I want a partner, an equal. That requires you having your own power, your own choices." She felt tears prick her eyes. Every other man who'd courted her had seen only the fortune. Dorian was offering to protect her from him. "Thank you," she whispered. He stepped closer still, until only a foot separated them. Slowly giving her time to retreat, he reached for her hand. His fingers were cool, slightly calloused, steady. "There's one more thing," he said. Genevieve looked up at him, her breath catching at the intensity in his eyes. "A wedding takes time to plan, but given the circumstances, the 6-month deadline, the gossip already circulating, I think we should marry quickly, within a month if possible." Genevieve's heart hammered. A month, 4 weeks to prepare for a marriage that would define the rest of her life. That's very fast. "I know. But the longer we wait, the more your fortune hunters will circle." He paused, his thumb brushing across her knuckles in an absent gesture that sent heat racing up her arm. and I find I don't want to wait." The honesty of it stole her words. She looked up at him, this man who was still mostly a stranger yet felt somehow familiar, and made a decision. "1 month," she agreed. "But Dorian, I want a small wedding, no spectacle, just family and a few close friends." Relief flooded his features. God, yes, I was dreading the alternative. Genevieve laughed, surprising herself. "We really are well matched." "We are." His eyes softened and he lifted her hand to his lips. The kiss he pressed to her knuckles was both formal and devastatingly intimate. Cool lips, gentle pressure, the touch of a man who had learned over centuries exactly how precious connection could be. "I'll take care of the arrangements," he said. "You focus on preparing yourself. I have no idea how to be a duchess." "Good, I've never liked duchesses. I prefer you as you are." The words settled around her heart like a warm blanket. The engagement was announced in the Times the following morning. "The Duke of Nighthollow is pleased to announce his engagement to Miss Genevieve Ashford, niece of the late Lady Octavia Ashford. The wedding will take place privately at St. George's Chapel in 1 month's time." Genevieve read it 3 times over breakfast, while her mother alternated between tears of joy and frantic planning. Her father looked bemused but pleased. Rosalind hugged her so tightly Genevieve could barely breathe. "A Duke, Ginny, you're going to be a duchess. I can hardly believe it." "Is he kind?" Rosalind asked more quietly. "I know the marriage is practical, but is he at least kind?" Genevieve thought of Dorian's gentleness when he'd spoken of his first wife, the way he'd promised never to pressure her, the care he'd taken to protect her fortune. "Yes," she said softly, "he's kind." But even as she said it, she realized it was more than kindness she felt from him. It was recognition, as if they'd both been lost in the same dark woods and had finally found another traveler who understood the path. The next 3 weeks passed in a blur of preparation. Genevieve visited dressmakers for her wedding gown and trousseau. She met with Dorian's solicitor to sign the papers protecting her inheritance. She wrote to friends and family, informing them of her impending marriage. And she saw Dorian. Every day, he called on her. Sometimes they walked in the park. Sometimes they sat in her aunt's library and talked about books about their childhoods, about the estates they would share. He told her about Night Hollow Hall, cold and imposing, full of ancestor portraits that seemed to judge him. She told him about growing up in her sister's shadow, about learning to make herself small. "You're not small," he said one afternoon as they sat in the garden behind her townhouse. "You've never been small. You were just surrounded by people who couldn't see properly. And you can. I'm learning to." He reached across the space between them and took her hand. It was becoming easier, these small touches. Natural. "You're teaching me," he said quietly. With each conversation, each shared silence, each moment of understanding, Genevieve felt the walls around her heart begin to crack. This was dangerous. She'd agreed to a practical marriage, not a love match. Letting herself feel more than partnership, more than companionship, was a risk she hadn't planned on taking. But when Dorian looked at her with those ancient eyes that seemed to see straight through her defenses, Genevieve wondered if perhaps the risk was worth it. The evening before the wedding, Genevieve was in her aunt's library reviewing some final estate documents when the butler announced a visitor. "Mrs. Blackwood, to see you, miss." Genevieve looked up confused. "I don't know a Mrs. Blackwood." "She says it's urgent, miss, about your aunt." A strange chill ran down Genevieve's spine. "Show her in." The woman who entered was elderly, perhaps 70, with silver hair and kind eyes. She wore a simple black dress, and she carried a worn leather satchel. "Miss Ashford," she said, her voice warm. "Forgive the intrusion. I'm Mrs. Blackwood. I was your aunt's companion in her final years." I didn't know my aunt had a companion. She was very private about it, but she trusted me with certain tasks, including this." Mrs. Blackwood withdrew an envelope from her satchel. Heavy paper, sealed with wax. Genevieve's name written in Aunt Octavia's unmistakable hand. "She instructed me to give this to you the evening before your wedding, only if you were marrying the Duke of Nighthollow." She paused, her eyes searching Genevieve's face. "She said you would need to understand the truth before you made your vows." Genevieve took the envelope with trembling fingers. "What truth?" "Read the letter, my dear. Your aunt explains it better than I ever could." And then with a gentle smile, Mrs. Blackwood left, leaving Genevieve alone with her aunt's final words. She broke the seal, unfolded the paper, and began to read. "My dearest Genevieve, if you are reading this, then you are about to marry Dorian Ravenscroft, and you deserve to know the truth about why I chose him for you. It's a story that begins 300 years ago, with a young woman named Lady Anne Ravenscroft. Anne was born in 1495. She had an older brother, a man named Dorian, who was her whole world. He was kind, brilliant, protective. Everything a brother should be. But in 1528, when Anne was 33, her brother disappeared. The official story was that he died, killed by bandits on the road to London. But Anne knew the truth. She'd seen the marks on his neck, the unnatural pallor, the way his eyes had changed in those final days. Her brother hadn't died. He'd been turned vampire, and he'd fled ashamed, convinced he was a monster, leaving his family behind to mourn him. Anne spent the rest of her life trying to find him. She left letters, hired investigators, searched every corner of England. She never found him, but she left detailed records for her children and her children's children. Generation after generation, the Ravenscroft women kept searching for their lost ancestor. I am Anne's great-great-great-great-granddaughter, Genevieve. I am the last of Dorian's mortal bloodline, and 30 years ago, I found him. Genevieve's hands shook so hard the paper rattled. Octavia was Dorian's family. She kept reading, her vision blurring with tears. I approached him carefully, showed him the family records, proved who I was. And do you know what he did, Genevieve? He wept. This ancient, powerful vampire wept like a child because he thought he'd lost his family forever. We became friends, the last mortal descendant of his beloved sister and the brother who'd watched over the bloodline for 3 centuries without ever revealing himself. Yes, darling, every bit of wealth I had, much of it came from Dorian. Gifts sent anonymously over the years to protect Anne's descendants. He's been watching over us for 300 years, ensuring we were safe, provided for, loved. But he was so lonely, Genevieve, so terribly, achingly lonely. I begged him for 30 years to find someone, to let himself love again, to stop punishing himself for becoming what he is. And then I met you, my brilliant, invisible, heartbreakingly beautiful niece, and I saw it. The same loneliness I saw in Dorian, the same quiet desperation to be seen. So I made a plan. The will wasn't about the money, darling. It was about giving you both permission to want more. Permission to be brave. You are marrying your cousin Genevieve, distant by blood but family nonetheless. Dorian is your great-great-great-great-great-uncle, Anne's brother, and I believe with all my heart that you can give him what his own sister wanted for him 300 years ago. A reason to live. Not just exist. Love him, Genevieve. Let him love you. And know that somewhere Lady Anne is smiling. Her brother finally came home. With all my love, always, Octavia. Genevieve couldn't breathe, couldn't think. Octavia was Dorian's family, which meant Genevieve was too. Distant, diluted over generations. But family. She understood now. Why Octavia had trusted him. Why she'd chosen him. Why she'd believed they would fit. Because Dorian had spent 3 centuries protecting a bloodline he thought he'd lost. And Genevieve was the last of it. Genevieve sat in the gathering darkness of the library, and Octavia's letter still clutched in her trembling hands. Family. She and Dorian were family. Not by choice, but by blood that had flowed through 300 years and countless generations to connect them in ways neither had known. Tomorrow she would marry him, and she would tell him the truth, that he had never been as alone as he thought, that his sister's legacy lived on, that he was finally coming home. The wedding day dawned clear and bright. Sunlight streamed through Genevieve's bedroom window like a benediction, though she knew Dorian wouldn't see it. He would arrive at the chapel after sunset when the shadows were long and safe. A twilight wedding. Fitting somehow. She stood before the mirror in her chemise while Mary and 2 other maids bustled around her, preparing her wedding gown. Genevieve barely recognized the woman staring back at her. Her dark auburn hair had been arranged in an elegant style, soft curls framing her face. Her eyes looked larger somehow, brighter with anticipation and nerves, and secrets. The letter from Aunt Octavia lay on her dressing table, the words burned into her memory. You are marrying your cousin Genevieve. How would Dorian react when she told him? Would he be shocked, relieved, devastated? She didn't know, but she knew she had to tell him before they spoke their vows. You look beautiful, miss, Mary said softly, appearing at her shoulder. His Grace is a lucky man. Genevieve smiled, though her hands trembled slightly. I think perhaps I'm the lucky one. The wedding gown was simple, ivory silk that fell in clean lines, no excessive ornamentation. Genevieve had chosen it specifically because it felt like her, not like the elaborate confections most brides wore. When the maids fastened it and stepped back, Genevieve saw something she hadn't expected. She looked like a bride who was loved, even if she wasn't. Not yet, not quite. but perhaps soon. The carriage ride to St. George's Chapel felt endless. Genevieve sat beside her father, Octavia's letter hidden in the folds of her gown. Her mother and Rosalind rode in a separate carriage already at the chapel making final preparations. Nervous? Her father asked gently. Terrified, Genevieve admitted. That's normal. Marriage is a leap of faith. He paused. But I've seen the way the Duke looks at you, Jenny. Whatever this marriage is, it's not indifferent. Genevieve's throat tightened. If only he knew how much more complicated it truly was. The chapel was small, intimate, and blessedly private. True to their agreement, only immediate family and a handful of close friends had been invited. Charlotte's parents sat in the front pew, her mother dabbing at tears. Rosalind beamed from beside them. A few of Dorian's relatives occupied the other side. Vampire nobles, mostly their perfect faces, impassive. But Genevieve barely noticed any of them, because the moment she entered, chaos erupted. A woman stood at the altar, breathtaking, golden-haired, dressed in crimson silk, vampire, and she was addressing the small crowd with a voice like silk over steel. Vampire marriages are eternal, she was saying. Dorian Ravenscroft is bound to me by blood and law. This farce of a wedding cannot proceed. Dorian stood rigid beside the altar, his face a mask of barely controlled fury. We separated over 200 years ago, Cordelia. You left, of your own choice. Cordelia, his first wife. Genevieve's blood ran cold. A temporary separation, Cordelia said smoothly, not a dissolution. She turned to the assembled vampires. The council will confirm this. Vampire marriages cannot be ended by mortal standards. Dorian belongs to me. Several vampire nobles nodded, murmuring agreement. The vicar looked utterly bewildered. Genevieve's father tensed beside her, but before he could move, Genevieve placed a hand on his arm. No, she said quietly, and then louder, no. Every head turned. Genevieve walked down the aisle, her wedding gown rustling with each step. Octavia's letter clutched in her hand. She looked like an avenging angel. No, she repeated, reaching the altar. You're wrong about everything, Lady Cordelia. Cordelia's eyes narrowed. The mortal girl speaks. How quaint. I'm not just a mortal girl. Genevieve turned to face the crowd. Her heart was hammering, but her voice was steady. My name is Genevieve Ashford. I am the great-great-great-great-great-niece of Lady Anne Ravenscroft. She paused, letting the words sink in. Who was sister to Dorian Ravenscroft before he was turned vampire in 1528? A murmur rippled through the crowd. Dorian's eyes widened, his face draining of what little color it held. I have a letter from my aunt, Lady Octavia Ashford, who spent 30 years researching our family line, who discovered that Dorian has been protecting his mortal bloodline for 3 centuries, supporting us, watching over us, ensuring his sister's descendants were safe. She held up the letter. This isn't a marriage of convenience. This is family finding family. This is a man who spent 300 years alone, believing he'd lost everyone he loved, discovering he still has someone who sees him. Her voice cracked with emotion. Not as vampire, not as Duke, but as the brother who loved his sister so much, he spent centuries protecting in her legacy. Tears streamed down her face. So no, Lady Cordelia, you don't get to stand here and claim him. You left him. You chose power over partnership. You chose eternity over love. She turned to Dorian, her voice softening. But I choose him, every day for the rest of my mortal life. I choose to see him, to love him, to give him what his sister Anne wanted for him 300 years ago. She paused, her eyes locked on his. A home. Dorian was staring at her with an expression of pure wonder and devastation and hope. You knew, he whispered. About Anne. I found out last night. Aunt Octavia left me a letter to be delivered on the eve of our wedding. She handed it to him. Read it, know the truth, and then decide. Do you still want to marry me? Your own blood, your family. Dorian took the letter with shaking hands. Read it quickly, his eyes scanning the pages. When he looked up, tears were streaming down his face. Anne, he breathed. Octavia was Anne's descendant. Yes. Which means you, I'm your family, distant but real. She took his hands. Aunt Octavia spent 30 years finding you, bringing you back to the family you thought you'd lost. And she trusted me to do the rest, to give you a reason to stop being alone. Dorian's hands tightened on hers. You already have, he said roughly. Genevieve, you've already given me everything. One of the vampire nobles stepped forward, an elderly man with kind eyes and silver hair. Lord Ravenscroft, he said gently. I am Lord Ashworth of the Council. I knew your sister Anne, briefly in her old age. His voice was thick with emotion. She never stopped searching for you. She left me a letter before she died in 1575, asking me, begging me to find you if I ever could, to tell you she forgave you, that she never thought you were a monster, that she wanted you to live, truly live. He paused. I've kept that letter for 240 years hoping to deliver it, but you disappeared so completely none of us could find you. He withdrew an ancient yellowed envelope from his coat. This is Anne's last words to you, written 5 days before her death. Dorian took it with trembling hands, broke the ancient seal, and read. Genevieve couldn't see the words, but she saw what they did to him. He collapsed to his knees, shoulders shaking with sobs that seemed torn from the depths of his soul. She forgave me, he choked out. She said I was still her brother. That becoming vampire didn't change that. He looked up at Genevieve through his tears. She wanted me to live, to be happy, to find love. Genevieve knelt beside him, wrapping her arms around him. You were never a monster, Dorian. You were always family, and you still are. Lord Ashworth cleared his throat. For the matter of Lady Cordelia's claim, the Council recognizes that vampire marriages, while eternal in theory, require consent of both parties. Lady Cordelia abandoned Lord Ravenscroft 210 years ago. By vampire law, that constitutes dissolution. He turned to Cordelia, his voice cold. Your marriage ended the day you left. You have no claim here. Cordelia's face twisted with fury. This is absurd. He's vampire. She's human. How can this possibly— Because they're family, Lord Ashworth interrupted, and family transcends species. Blood calls to blood, even blood diluted over 300 years. He turned to the vicar. Proceed with the ceremony. Cordelia stood frozen for a moment, rage and disbelief warring in her expression. Then with a last venomous look at Genevieve, she turned and swept out of the chapel, leaving silence in her wake. Dorian rose slowly, helping Genevieve to her feet. His eyes were red from crying, his face raw with emotion. But there was something else there now, hope, peace, home. Are you certain, he asked quietly, knowing what you know now, that I'm your family, your ancestor's brother? Are you certain you want this? Genevieve cupped his face in her hands. I've never been more certain of anything. You spent 300 years protecting people you loved but couldn't know. Now let me know you. Let me love you. Let me be your family. Dorian's answering smile was radiant. Then let's get married. The ceremony was simple. The vicar, still slightly bewildered by the supernatural drama, stumbled through the traditional words. Genevieve barely heard them. All she could see was Dorian, standing before her in the candlelight, his dark eyes filled with wonder and love and hope. Wilt thou have this woman to thy wedded wife? The vicar intoned. To live together after God's ordinance in the holy estate of matrimony. Wilt thou love her, comfort her, honor, and keep her in sickness and in health, and forsaking all others, keep thee only unto her, so long as ye both shall live? Dorian's eyes never left hers. I will, he said, for every day she'll have me. Then it was Genevieve's turn. The vicar repeated the vows, and Genevieve's voice came out clear and strong. I will. They exchanged rings, simple gold bands that felt heavier than they looked. When Dorian slid the ring onto her finger, his hands were steady. Sure. I now pronounce you man and wife, the vicar declared. You may kiss your bride. Dorian cupped Genevieve's face gently, leaned in slowly, and kissed her with such tenderness it took her breath away. Cool lips, warm emotion, the perfect contradiction that was loving him. When they pulled apart, Dorian whispered against her lips, Hello, wife, ye. Hello, husband. And just like that, Genevieve Ashford became the Duchess of Night Hollow. The wedding breakfast was small, intimate, just family and close friends gathered at Genevieve's townhouse. Lord Ashworth attended, along with a few other vampire nobles who'd known Anne centuries ago. They shared stories of her, the sister Dorian had loved and lost. Genevieve listened, tears streaming down her face as these ancient beings spoke of a woman who'd never given up searching for her brother. She was fierce, Lord Ashworth said quietly. Even as an old woman, she never stopped hoping you'd return. She left instructions for her children and their children after them. Never stop searching, she said. My brother is out there, and he needs to know he's not forgotten. Dorian's hand tightened on Genevieve's. I spent 3 centuries thinking I'd destroyed my family by becoming this, he said, his voice rough. I thought fleeing was protecting them. I didn't realize I didn't know. You were protecting them, Lord Ashworth said gently. Just not in the way you thought. Anne's line prospered because of your anonymous gifts, your care, your love. He raised his glass. To Anne Ravenscroft, who loved her brother enough to ensure his bloodline never forgot him. To Anne, the gathering echoed. Dorian sat beside Genevieve, his hand clasped tightly in hers. He didn't speak much, seemed overwhelmed by emotion, but every few minutes he would look at her with such wonder that Genevieve's heart ached. As the afternoon faded into evening, they made their excuses, said their goodbyes, and left for Thornfield Manor. The estate welcomed them with golden twilight spilling across the honey-colored stone. Dorian helped Genevieve down from the carriage, his hands lingering at her waist. "Home," he said softly. "Our home." They walked through the gardens hand in hand, past roses and lavender, past the fountain where water trickled over moss-covered stone. The air was sweet with summer flowers, the sky painted in shades of amber and rose. They reached a bench beneath an ancient oak tree, sat together in the gathering darkness. "I still can't believe it," Dorian said quietly. "Anne's bloodline. Your Anne's bloodline. And you protected us for 300 years. I didn't know. If I had, I would have. "You did know," Genevieve interrupted gently. "Maybe not consciously, but some part of you must have recognized us. Why else would you have helped, protected, cared?" She leaned against his shoulder. "Blood calls to blood, even across centuries." Dorian's arm came around her, pulling her close. "I thought I was protecting strangers, atoning for what I'd become. You were protecting family, you always were." They sat in comfortable silence as stars began to appear overhead. The moon rose a pale crescent in the darkening sky. "Genevieve," Dorian said finally. "Yes. When Cordelia appeared today, she said something. About you aging while I stay the same. About me watching you die while I continue." His voice was tight with pain. "She wasn't wrong about that. 50 years from now, you'll be old, and I'll still look exactly as I do now." Genevieve turned to face him, taking both his hands in hers. "I know. I've thought about it, the difference in our lifespans. And you're truly all right with that. I'm all right with having whatever time we're given. Whether that's 50 years or 5, I would rather have that time with you than an eternity with anyone else." Dorian's eyes filled with tears. "I will mourn you," he said fiercely. "When your time comes, it will break me." "I know, but Dorian, you've lived for 287 years. And you've never felt as alive as you do right now. You said so yourself." She cupped his face. "However many years we have, 10 or 50 or 70, they will be worth more than all the centuries you've lived alone." "Promise me something," Dorian whispered. "Anything. When you're old and gray, don't ask me to turn you out of desperation. Let me love you as you are, human, mortal, real." Genevieve's eyes filled with tears. "I promise. I don't want to be turned. I want to live my life as it was meant to be lived. With you, for as long as I have. And promise me you won't spend the next 300 years alone. That you'll let yourself love again. Live again. Genevieve. Promise me, Dorian. I need to know you'll be all right." He pulled her close, burying his face in her hair. "I promise," he whispered, "though I can't imagine loving anyone the way I love you." Genevieve closed her eyes. "Good, because I can't imagine being loved by anyone but you." They stayed like that for a long time. Two souls who'd found each other across centuries and species and impossible odds. A vampire and a human, an immortal and a mortal. Family. Finally, Dorian stood and offered his hand. "Come with me. There's something I want to show you." He led her to the library, to a portrait that hung above the fireplace. It showed a young woman with auburn hair and kind eyes, dressed in the style of the late 1500s. Her face bore a striking resemblance to Genevieve's. "Anne," Dorian said softly, "the only portrait of her that survived. I've carried it with me for 300 years." Genevieve stared at the painting, tears streaming down her face. "I look like her. Yes, when I first saw you at that ball, I thought for one impossible moment that I was seeing a ghost." He smiled through his own tears. "But you're not a ghost. You're real. You're here, your family." Genevieve turned to him, overwhelmed by emotion. "I love you," she said, "not because Aunt Octavia arranged this, not because we're distant family, but because you see me, and I see you." "I love you too," Dorian replied, his voice rough. "My wife, my family, my home." And then he kissed her. Not with the gentleness of the chapel, but with 300 years of loneliness finally finding its end. Genevieve returned the kiss with everything she had, her hands sliding into his hair, pulling him closer. When they finally broke apart, both breathless Dorian rested his forehead against hers. "I have spent 3 centuries walking this earth," he whispered, "and I have never felt as blessed as I do right now." "Then we'll make every day count," Genevieve said. "Every precious fleeting day." He took her hand and led her from the library, up the stairs, to the bedroom they would share. Their bedroom. As Dorian closed the door behind them, Genevieve saw not the end of a story, but the beginning of one. A story about two people who'd learned what it meant to be seen. A story about family lost and found. A story about choosing love over fear, partnership over perfection, truth over pretense. Outside stars wheeled overhead, infinite and bright. And inside Thornfield Manor, in the room beneath Anne's portrait, two souls who'd found each other across impossible distances fell into each other's arms. The vampire duke and his unsuitable bride, the immortal and the mortal, the lonely souls who were lonely no more. And as they loved each other through that first night of their marriage, as dawn broke pale and golden through the windows, as Dorian held Genevieve close with a tenderness born of centuries of waiting, one truth became clear. Aunt Octavia had been right all along. This wasn't a punishment. It wasn't even just a solution. It was a gift. The gift of being seen. The gift of coming home. The gift of family. And somewhere in whatever realm exists beyond this one, Lady Anne Ravenscroft smiled. Her brother had finally come home, and he was loved.